Hello, my name's Erin Larkin. I'm an Australian wine reviewer, and today we are looking at the 2022 Standish Shiraz collection. I recently visited Barossa and I went and saw Dan Standish and we looked at these wines together over the course of several hours. He had 2 bottles open for me to look at that day. The first had been open since the Monday. It was Wednesday night when we were tasting, and the other had been opened on Wednesday. And that's a really important distinction because my notes on the Advocate, which are being published this week or were published this week, are based on the bottle opened that day. But in the note, I include a bit of conversation around how the wines evolve over a couple of days opened. So today, these wines, I open them, It's 11:45 now. I open them at 10:30. I open them double decanted, so into the decanter, back into the bottle, no gas. I'm just going to leave them and I'll look at them over the course of this week. So before we dive into the wines, let's discuss the 2022 vintage, because the beautiful thing about a producer like Standish is that we have a very, very focused frame of reference, which is these 4 core wines. Obviously, for long-time fans, there have been other wines over the years. Andelmont, for example, is one of them. And these are wines that are made in vintages that suit those vineyards. And they come as they come. We don't predict them. We don't know. We can't predict them. We don't know. So 2022 as a season is a really lovely pair to 2021. So if we wind the clock back a bit, we've got 18, 19, 20, which are all very increasingly warm, increasingly dry, low-yielding seasons. And the wines are really kind of compacted, compressed, tightly coiled, potentially higher in alcohol. I think across the board, many of them were. And they have that density and darkness and depth that you get in a very warm vintage. 2021 rolled around and it had good yields, which is a change. It had good rainfall leading in through winter and spring, so it was a beautiful season. It was long and mild, and the wines were brilliant. They were brilliant. 2021 was a really successful season for a lot of producers in the Barossa. Then we have 22. So when I was in the Barossa in 2021, I asked many producers, how has this year been for you? And they all smiled before they answered, it's been pretty good. So in 2022, I was wondering, how are we going to top that? And it seems to me that the wines that I have looked at across the board, not just Standish, but across the board in the Barossa, is that the 2022 wines are very similar to the 2021s. If anything, they're slightly finer, slightly softer, slightly plumper. What we have in terms of growing conditions was a very wet winter, a very wet spring, lovely lead in to the growing season. And then they usually get this extreme heat wave, really warm period in February. For anyone living in Australia, you know February is a very, very hot month. They get heat spikes through February, but in 2022, they just didn't get them. It just didn't hit that 40-degree mark. Often there's a week or 2 of that kind of temperature. They just didn't get it. It was a really lovely, long growing season. So we have these wines that are all labelled at 14.9% alcohol, which is a change. Last year we saw a little bit higher, up in the 15s for some of those cuvées. Now we're looking at all 14.9. And as a whole, I would say this is the most balanced, the most exciting, for my palate as I see it, release of Standish Shiraz to date. It's a big start, and I'm very excited about these wines this year. So starting in wine number 1, this is the 2022, the Relic. So this is from the Hongel family vineyard, which is in Krondorf. It has 1% Viognier skins. And this year, there was a slightly higher proportion of whole bunch across the range. This year, the Relic received 25% whole bunches in its ferment. And for the first time, at least the first time that I can recall, the Relic and the Standish both included some of the concrete egg in the ferment. That is usually reserved for the Schubert's Theorem, which is something that I love about this wine and maybe why I love these wines so much this year, I don't know. But it received a little bit of the egg, 25% whole bunch, 14.9% alcohol and 1% Viognier. So what does it taste like? It's classically floral. It's raspberry pip, there's blood orange, licorice. It's got all the kind of flowers, roses and violets. Red licorice. It's a beautiful wine, beautiful, beautiful, floral and lifted, which is the Viognier. But what I look for in this wine is not just that kind of floral lift that you get from the Viognier, because that can be kind of a simplifying factor in some way. It's alluring. It provides glossiness. It boosts the colour. It does all of these beautiful, shiny sort of things. But I always want to see what the fruit looks like underneath it. And for me, the fruit this year is gorgeous. It's beautifully balanced. It's savoury, but it's not overt. It's a really wonderful kind of iteration of this wine. Unbelievably silky, long. I think this is a wine that can perhaps, like, maybe people might gravitate away from it because of the Viognier, but I think that if you can put your faith in this wine for the future, that beautiful kind of floral register really does sink into the fruit over time, and it becomes this kind of bacon fatty, savoury sort of character. It's really unbelievably beautiful. And I think that this, although it's beautiful now, and I do urge you to open a bottle if you bought a bunch of them, super beautiful now, but this will, I think, age in a very, very elegant direction in time. Moving into wine number 2. Now, this is the 2022 Standish. This is from the Laycock family vineyard, which is in Greenock. It received 50% whole bunches in the ferment this year, and it did get some egg action, as discussed. This is a wine that usually is the lowest pointed wine for me in the range. That's not because I don't love it. The scores across the range are unbelievably high. So still, in the context of the Barossa and the world, this puts it in kind of the very top echelon, but everything has to have a ranking. I can't give them all the same score. So what I have done recently with this wine is I have opened some older bottles that I have. Obviously, I've got a bunch of them, and have drunk them, and they are amazing. It seems to be that the wine on release is this savoury, spicy, exotic kind of quite a zen wine, and it's almost the earthiest and the gruntiest and the most muscly of the wines on release. But as those tannins melt into the wine over time, this just becomes unbelievably impressive. And so I give it the score that it deserves on release, because that is actually the only way I can call it. But don't let that put you off the ageability of this wine. And when I was in the Barossa this year talking to Dan, I said to him, I want to do a vertical of all of them, of all of the Standish you've ever done, from the very first vintage, 99 to 2023. So next year I'm going to go and do that 24 wine vertical. I'll do a video. I might try and get the elusive Dan on film. He probably won't agree to do that, but I would love it if he did. And because we get to see this wine over time, and I think that's something that's really important. We talk about the wines on release and how they look, but we don't necessarily, as reviewers, go back and look at them again and re-review them, although I like to do that to show the variability and undulation of wine over time, but it's not required of us. And I think that can miss out. As we know as drinkers, the wines evolve and grow beautifully in the cellar. So, on the nose. This has got all of that kind of Marrakesh spice that I love, kind of like ras el hanout and cumin, and if you were kind of dry frying spices in a pan, it's got that kind of exotic, warm, toasty sort of character. It's got the red earth. Greenock's a really beautiful part of the Barossa in my mind. It's quite the wines are sort of quite earthy and dense in my opinion. I love it there. I actually love the Barossa, as we know, but I think that it's quite pronounced in the wine, and it's why it looks the way it does every year. This is the finest, the purest, and the most kind of seamless I've ever seen this wine look. I love it. I don't know if that's the egg component protecting a little core of freshness within the very heart of the wine, or whether that's the whole bunch this year, or whether it's the season, or whether it's all of those things. But it's a beautiful, beautiful iteration, far more elegant than years gone by. And yeah, I kind of really, really respect this wine and love how it looks this year. Moving into the Schuberts. So as you know, this was my favourite wine last year. The favourites change every single year, but I do have a very, very soft spot for the Schuberts because it kind of it's so dark. Obviously the label's very dark, but it kind of represents the wine too, and the soils that it's grown in. It's pure in its way. It's got this gorgeous kind of luminosity about it. I just really, really love the Schuberts. It's the one that I buy a set of them every year, but it's always the one that I'm like, well, I'll buy a bit more of that because it's It's just kind of like this beautiful expression of Shiraz that feels quite unfettered to me. And in all of them, the wine, there's no evidence of oak. You're not looking at oaky wines at all. The alcohol's beautifully entrenched into the fruit. Every element of these wines is kind of seamless and effortless, and that's why I like them. That's why I drink these wines. They're probably one of the few high alcohol reds that I drink and buy and lust after and consume and think about and all of the good stuff. So this is the 2022 Schubert's Theorem. It has had 50% whole bunches in the ferment, obviously with a component of egg as well. This is from the Ronenfeld Road vineyard in Marananga. If you consider the other producers that make Ronenfeld Road single vineyard wines that are really kind of muscular and dense and earthy, this is Marananga, right? This is a really powerful sub-region in the Barossa. But it's not a sub-region, it's an area. There's only one classified sub-region in the Barossa, and that's High Eden in the Eden Valley. This is just a pure, glittering expression of Shiraz, and I just love it. This again vied for my favourite wine this year. It was just slightly pipped, but it's actually not because this wine is any worse than last year, because I just love it. It's like blueberries and coal dust, black tea. It's got pressed flowers. It's licorice and brine and star anise, cracked fennel. It's got all these kind of gorgeous, glittery, slightly minty, nighttime sort of characters to the wine. It's fresh, it's pure, it's silky, but it has that fantastic thing that the Barossa does so well, and that is that savoury undercurrent of tannin. It's earthy as well as being all of those beautiful, shimmery, shiny, seamless sort of things. It's just got a beautiful regionality about it. All of these wines do, but in the context of the personality of this wine, it sits up well and pronounced, and I loved it this year. Finally, moving into the 2022 Lamella. So this is from the Hutton Vale Farm vineyard owned by the Angus family. It's up in the Eden Valley. I love the Eden Valley. Every time I go to the Barossa, I try and make an effort to get up there, preferably early in the morning, because the sun kind of rising and cascading through the gum trees up there. I mean, I think it's kind of a magical place. And in a world that's becoming increasingly more populated by people, there's very little up in the Eden Valley, and it's got this gorgeous kind of otherworldly thing about it. I just think it's kind of magical, and the wines that come from there are also kind of magical, as this is. So this is 100% whole bunch, as usual. Now, this wine, let me just quickly tell you something about it. I think that 100% whole bunch in any wine, whether it's Pinot Noir from Burgundy, whether it's Shiraz from the Barossa, any red wine that has 100% whole bunch runs the risk of being overtaken by that element. So what I mean by that is when we make wines that come from places, it's really exciting to be able to taste the place and go, wow, that density is like Greenock, that muscle, that grit, that kind of intensity is like Marananga. You want to see those things. And so when you put 100% whole bunches in it, what you see is lots of whole bunch. And whole bunch can be coming from anywhere. It's not a regional character. It's a thing that grows, and it grows everywhere. I think that of Burgundy, I think that of Rhone, I think that of the Barossa. And so to me, when a wine has balance and effortlessness and flow and harmony and eloquence with 100% whole bunches, that's very exciting, because the whole bunches contribute not just a tannic element, but spice and complexity and freshness and this kind of whole other spectrum of stuff that goes on with whole bunches. So then obviously the vintage plays a huge role, because a cold vintage where the stems don't necessarily have the time to lignify, maybe they have to pick early for rain, or maybe it just never gets quite hot enough, those stems don't give a gorgeous character. In a very hot vintage, they might lignify quite quickly, but you might have to pick the fruit earlier so that you don't get overripe fruit. So it's really a balancing act to try and get these seasons where you have this long enough hang time to get beautiful ripeness in the fruit, but equally lignification in the stems. And that is the magic point. And I think this year saw a magical point for this wine. I think it saw a magical point for this wine. I think this is the best I have ever seen the Lamella look on release. I love it. When I looked at it with Dan on that day in the winery, Again, to explain, he showed me 2 bottles. One bottle had been opened Monday morning. It was Wednesday night. The other had been opened that day, that Wednesday afternoon. And it was clear to me that the bottle that was opened Monday was far more seamless, far more complete, far more complex than the wine that was opened on the same day. So I absolutely urge you, if you want to drink these wines, a really nice interval to open them is just to open it, taste it, put the cork back in the day before. You don't need to do anything fancy with it. You don't need to take it into a decanter and back in the bottle. None of that. Just take the cork out, taste it, make sure you're happy with it. Remember what it tastes like when you open it, put the cork back in and drink it the following day. It is infinitely better. So to this wine. On the nose, it's floral. There's blood orange. It's got Canotto. There's kind of a crushed nut, scraped vanilla pod, raspberry pip. It's concentrated, it's intense, it's fine, it's floral, it's mineral. There's like crushed quartz and red earth and kind of rust and ferrous and blood and all that gorgeous kind of stuff that you get from the earth. On the palate, the tannins really push this wine to the extremity of the palate. It's a capacious, layered, complex wine that sort of expands in the mouth, and it's extraordinarily long. I mean, the note that I wrote when I was at the winery basically wrote itself. I tasted it a couple of times, was talking to Dan, asking him questions. What did you do here? What did you do there? And the note just wrote itself. There's one other thing that I should tell you about this wine, because it's not on the label. You won't read about it anywhere else unless other writers have had the same experience with Dan. But in the early days when this wine was sourced from the Stone Garden Vineyard, we saw a change basically from the Stone Garden Vineyard to the Hutton Vale Farm Vineyard. Stone Garden was planted in the middle 1800s and is a really historic site, a really wonderful vineyard site. And this year, Dan was able to get a couple of barrels of Shiraz, well, fruit for a couple of barrels of Shiraz from the Stone Garden Vineyard. So this 2022 Lamella has got a couple of barrels of that very, very, very old vine fruit from that original Lamella vineyard. So it's kind of like this gorgeous coming back around full circle situation. And I don't know if that's what catapults it into the realm of perfection, whatever perfection is. But for me, it kind of does. It's just savoury and beautiful. It's just balanced and gorgeous and very exciting. So yeah, make your own mind up. The discussion around perfection is a funny one because I've had so many wines over my life that I thought, wow, that's pretty amazing. But very few of them have gone, I don't know if I want anything else from this wine. And I don't know if I want anything else from this wine, from this place, from this producer, from this grape. Yeah, it's really only happened a handful of times, and I can tell you the wines in my life that have struck that chord with me. It may be different for you, but I just think that this has everything that we want from great wine. So, yeah, confirmed as, again, for me, as I see it, as being one of the greatest Shiraz producers, if not the greatest Shiraz producer in the country. Big, big call. I really want to hear if you have tasted the 2022s. I have heard from a number of you that actually you had tasted them much before me. You'd gone to the cellar door and tried them with Dan. I'd love to hear what you think about them as compared to the 2021s, which were also excellent. As a side note, I am aware that this video was released after Dan's mailing list release. When I got onto him earlier this year and said, please let me know when I can do a video. I want the wines. I want to do that video before your release. He said, no, thank you. Please don't. It's been difficult for him to keep up with the demand that this video has had the potential of creating. So I don't know where I sit on that. I think that next year I might push him and try and get the wines beforehand and do a video beforehand, because I do like being able to give that to you before you go and buy the wines. The amount of emails, text messages, private messages on LinkedIn, Instagram, asking where the video is, I'm very sorry about it. Comments on YouTube, I'm really sorry about it. It was a discussion that I had with Dan and he did ask me to wait. May not do that again next year. Thanks for watching. Love to hear what you think. Leave your comments down below and I'm going to get back to each and every one of you. Thanks.